I think we've got a few minutes, so I'm just standing here. I'm not waiting on you. Yeah. Until Pat gives me the thumbs up. Good? All right. Okay. Well, since everybody's quiet, we'll gain 1 minute in class. If you will, go ahead and turn in your Bibles to Romans, the 1st chapter. While you're turning there, by way of introduction, the class this morning is going to be on the subject of gossip. And first, before we start, I want to express on behalf of the shepherds that this lesson is not the result of any single event. We as a group will never take a shotgun approach to a situation where I'm really upset with Craig, and because I'm upset with Craig or there's a problem with Craig, we're going to try to address it in a sermon or in a class. If there's an issue with Craig, then we will talk to Craig. Also, Craig is my default bad guy this morning. I have warned him ahead of time. In some of the conversation this morning, I have to give an example. What if Craig did this? I picked Craig, one, because he's tough. He can take it, and two, because I know it's not an issue with Craig. And so whenever I'm saying these things about Craig this morning, just know that it's not him. Everything's fine. But in broad terms, we recognize that gossip is something that all people of all ages struggle with. And we've seen the damage that it has caused for families that we know and love in the world and here in this church. Now, I know people don't like to do this, but nod your head. Are we all family here? Okay. Can we be vulnerable with each other? Okay. By show of hands, and I'll start. Raise your hand if you've ever been the victim or harmed by gossip. Keep your hand up or raise your hand if you have ever gossiped. That response is evidence that this is something we need to be talking about. And so we're going to do it this morning. Sometimes in the Lord's church, gossip is treated flippantly, as if when we gossip, we're not actually sinning, we're just not following good advice. My daddy told me when I was a kid to look a man in the eye when you talk to him and give him a good firm handshake. And Mama always said, don't talk about somebody behind their back. But when we engage in gossip, we're not just being impolite or not following good advice. Let us be clear in our speech as we start the conversation this morning. Gossip is sin. In the 1st chapter of Romans, in verse 18, Paul begins talking about all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men. He says that those men who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. That's the way Paul begins the conversation. He goes on in verse 24 to say, therefore God gave them up in their lust of their hearts to impurity. He's given them up to impurity, to the dishonoring of their bodies among themselves, because they exchanged the truth about God for a lie. They worshiped and served the creature rather than the Creator. Paul's talking about bad things happening. In verse 28 through 32, Paul continues, and since they did not see fit to acknowledge God, these are people that are not acknowledging God, they're worshiping the creature rather than the Creator. God gave them up to a debased mind to do what ought not to be done. They were filled with all manner of unrighteousness and evil, covetousness, malice. They were full of envy and murder and strife and deceit, maliciousness. They are gossips and slanderers and haters of God. God takes gossip seriously. The reason God takes this so seriously shouldn't be a shock to us. In the book of Proverbs, in the 16th chapter in verse 28, the proverb writer says, a dishonest man spreads strife, and a whisperer separates close friends. We're going to talk about that word, a whisperer, later. A whisperer separates close friends. Proverbs 26 and verse 20. For lack of wood, the fire goes out, and when there is no whisperer, quarreling ceases. Where the wood goes out, the fire stops. And when people stop whispering, what's the result of that? Quarreling ceases. We're going to have some hard things to say this morning, and let me start with this one. Unity will never be achieved where gossip is present. The Christian who claims to desire unity in the church while spreading gossip about its members is either deceiving you or deceiving himself or both. So let me say it again. Unity will never be achieved where gossip is present. Gossip divides us because when I whisper about my brother, I create division between who I'm talking to and who I'm talking about. I drive a wedge between them. In 2 Corinthians 5, starting in verse 17, Paul says, therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old has passed away. Behold, the new has come. All this is from God, who through Christ reconciled us to himself and gave us the ministry of reconciliation. 2 Corinthians 5 has changed the way that I think about my interaction with my brothers. We talked about this in an adult class a few months ago. The idea of being ministers of reconciliation and having the ministry of reconciliation. If you are an ambassador for your God, the ministry that you have is to show the world what reconciliation looks like. We are to be messengers of reconciliation. The fruit of gossip is never reconciliation. Reconciliation and unity never come from gossip. Gossip creates teams and factions and cliques, and all of those things stand in opposition to unity. Reconciliation is a fruit of the new creature, 2 Corinthians 5. And if you engage in gossip, you are feeding that old man of sin. God hates gossip because gossip divides his family. It drives a wedge between his children. But gossip not only divides, it hurts his children. Listen carefully to this. Gossip that remains hidden, this is where Craig comes in. Gossip that remains hidden, that never comes to light, still hurts. And I think that that's something we don't fully acknowledge sometimes. When Craig comes to me and gossips about Pat, and Pat never finds out, Pat is still hurt. And we have this idea that as long as I'm whispering, other people don't hear. And when other people don't hear, it's not a problem because it's just a conversation between me and Craig. And as long as the conversation stays between me and Craig, what's the big deal? Gossip hurts because it creates a situation where I'm exposed to information about a person's actions or a person's character, or worse, speculation about their actions or their character. And it damages their reputation in a way that they're not able to defend. When Craig comes to me with information or speculation about Pat, and he whispers that to me, even if Pat never hears it, Pat is harmed because his reputation and his character has been damaged, and he's not able to defend himself. Craig has planted a seed in my mind about Pat that will always linger. When I don't go to Pat to seek the truth, because doing so would expose me and my friend Craig to allegations of gossip, I can't go to Pat and try to clear the air. Pat's reputation has been damaged. He's hurt, and he doesn't even know it yet. And it might not surface until years later. When we think about the character of God, we think about his love and his mercy and his kindness and his justice. But gossip, even if it's never exposed, even if years later the gossip is never exposed, it never comes to light, Craig and I have a private conversation about Pat, and Pat never finds out, nobody else ever finds out. Gossip, even that's never exposed, is not loving. Love is not in that conversation. It is not merciful, it is not kind, and it is not just. Even if what Craig said about Pat is true, and even if Pat never finds out that we talked about him, justice does not whisper allegations in secret where Pat can't defend himself. That's not what justice looks like. We're to be representatives of our God when we serve a just God. Justice does not whisper allegations in secret. In Galatians, the 5th chapter, it's a passage we're all familiar with. In Galatians, the 5th chapter, I'm going to start reading in verse 19. Now the works of the flesh are evident: sexual immorality, impurity, sensuality, idolatry, sorcery, enmity, strife, and jealousy, fits of anger, rivalries, dissensions, divisions, envy, drunkenness, orgies, and things like these. I warned you, as I warned you before, that those who do such things will not inherit the kingdom of God. But the fruit of the Spirit is love and joy and peace and patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against such things there is no law, and those who belong to Christ Jesus have crucified the flesh and its passions and desires. All of those things in the first part of the list have been crucified and replaced with the fruit of the Spirit. If we live by the Spirit, let us also keep in step with the Spirit, Paul says. Craig whispering to me about Pat. Here's something that I do. So kids, pro tip. If you're ever faced with a difficult decision, the first step that I always take in a difficult decision is I imagine a clipboard with a good idea column and a bad idea column. And I've got to put the idea in one of them. And if it goes in the bad idea column, it's immediately off the table. If it goes in the good idea, then we can kind of figure out how to implement it. But good idea or bad idea, which one is it? Craig whispering to me about Pat, which column does it fit in? The column of love and kindness and goodness and faithfulness? Or on the other side of the sheet of paper, the column of enmity and strife and rivalries and divisions? That conversation has to go on one side of the sheet of the paper. Which one is it? Paul says in Galatians 5 and verse 25, if we live by the Spirit, let us also keep in step with the Spirit. A hard statement to say and a hard statement to receive. Make no mistake about it. You will not be led by the Spirit to engage in gossip, either as the speaker or the hearer. Because gossip divides and hurts. The fruit of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, patience, and kindness, and goodness, and gentleness, and self-control, none of that is at the top of the column where that gossiping, whispering conversation occurs. You will never be led by the Spirit to engage in gossip. If we are engaging in gossip, it's not of the Spirit. We are feeding that old man of flesh, that old creature. We can all acknowledge that gossip is bad. But I think it would be good for us to not only acknowledge the intellectual fact, gossip is sinful, but to talk about what gossip is and give some examples. That's where Craig gets beat up this morning. Give some examples of how that might play out in our lives so we'll recognize it when it comes up. The first example we're going to look at is when gossip manifests as the speaking of a lie, an untruth. When we look at all the forms of gossip that it can take, I believe this is the least common in the church because people immediately recognize it as sin. Revelation 21:8. My sister, when I was a child, my sister would sing the song to me, Revelation 21:8, 21:8. Liars go to hell, liars go to hell. And then she would look me in the eye and say, burn, burn, burn. Yeah, we were young. But Revelation 21:8, as for the cowardly, the faithless, the detestable, as for murderers, the sexually immoral, sorcerers, idolaters, and all liars, their portion will be in the lake that burns with fire and sulfur, which is the second death. So we're going to take that one off the table right away. I think it's easy for us just to cross that one off the list. If something is a lie, don't say it, period, full stop. I think we're all on the same page there. Don't speak lies. Don't lie about your brothers. And don't listen to them. But there's a variation of this that we need to be careful of. As the disciples of the one who described himself as the truth, it's not enough just to not lie. Above all else, we should be representatives of the truth. Ephesians 4, starting in verse 24, Paul says, to put off your old self, which belongs to your former manner of life and is corrupt through deceitful desires, and be renewed in the spirit of your minds, and to put on the new self, created after the likeness of God in true righteousness and holiness. Therefore, because we were a different creature, we were something old, he says we're going to kill off that creature. It's the same language that we saw a few minutes ago. We're going to kill off that creature, and we're going to become something new and different. Therefore, because we are something new and different, having put away falsehood, he said putting away the falsehood, that's already occurred. Like, stop lying. That's happened. Putting away falsehood has already happened. Let each one of you speak the truth with his neighbor, for we are members one another. It is not enough to not lie. We must speak the truth. This manifests in our lives today in the form of conversations that start with, well, I heard. Now, sometimes this can be harmless. I'm not advocating that we become robots who see the world through a lens of ones and zeros. For example, when my son Carson wanted to organize a game of Ultimate Frisbee this summer, I told him, I heard Jared Nettles likes to play Frisbee golf. You should invite him. Now, I don't know that Jared likes Ultimate Frisbee, and I don't know that he likes Frisbee golf, but I was pretty sure at some point, I don't even know where, I thought that Jared Nettles' name and Frisbee came up in the same conversation. I'll give another example about me. I got a text one day, this last year or the year before or something. I got a text while I was at work. It was from Travis Starling. It said, how old are you? That's all it said. How old are you? Just in the middle of the day. And I was like, well, I'm not going to answer that question. I want more information. I want backstory. So I called him immediately. The phone rings. So what is happening right now? What's going on? He said, well, we're just all sitting around and we're trying to figure out how old you are. I said, well, who is who all? We all are just saying, who all is we all? And he goes, well, all of us. We're sitting around at lunch, and there's like 5 or 6 people sitting around. And we're just trying to figure out how old you are. And I said, okay, I will tell you how old I am, but first, I want to know what each person guessed. You tell me what you guessed, and then I'll tell you what the real answer is. Me suggesting that Jared be invited to Ultimate Frisbee, I think, that he likes Frisbee. That's not gossip. And people sitting around guessing how old Eric is not gossip. And me telling you that Cody Cox guessed a very unflattering age is not gossip. I won't tell you what the number was, but it was disproportionate. Do you see the difference between those? Like, those are all I heard conversations. Do you see the difference in those and me saying, I heard Craig and Anna are having marriage problems? There's a difference, and if you're not sure if what you're about to speculate about is harmful or harmless, let me give you a good rule of thumb. Remember back in Romans 1, where he said gossips, Romans 1, 28 and 29, and since they did not see fit to acknowledge God, God gave them up to a debased mind to do what ought not to be done. They were filled with all manner of unrighteousness, evil and covetousness and malice. They are full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, maliciousness. They are gossips, Paul said. That word gossip in Romans 1 is defined as a whisperer, a secret slanderer, a detractor. Someone who doesn't give, they take. So a fair guardrail against gossip would be this. If they were standing there, would you be saying it? If they were to walk up in the middle of your conversation, would you lower your voice to a whisper? Because in the first example, you'd quickly say, "Hey, Jared, come here. We were just talking about you. Do you like Frisbee-related activities?" Or you would just text me in the middle of the day and say, "How old are you?" Loop me into the conversation. In the other example, you'd never call Craig and Anna over to you to publicly question the health of their marriage. You would never do that. Because that is, by definition, gossip. We are detracting from their character rather than contributing to it. It's a whisper kept in secret from the person you're talking about. So rule number 1 about gossip, don't lie. Rule number 2 about gossip, don't offer harmful speculation. If you don't know if it's true or not, don't say it. We should be representatives of the truth. Now, a version of gossip that sometimes we feel more comfortable with that adheres to rule number 1 and number 2. Don't lie, number 1, and number 2, don't offer harmful speculation. Well, I can adhere to 1 and 2. Sometimes gossip can be true, but harmful. Proverbs 11 and verse 13, "Whoever goes about slandering reveals secrets, but he who is trustworthy in spirit keeps a thing covered." Proverbs 17:9, "Whoever covers an offense seeks love, but he who repeats a matter separates close friends." Proverbs 20:19, "Whoever goes about slandering reveals secrets. Therefore do not associate with a simple babbler." Listen carefully to what's being said here. Not all true things need to be spoken. Not all sin needs to be revealed to everyone. Eric, are you telling me that if I know my brother is sinning or I have a problem with my brother, I shouldn't confront him? No, unequivocally, no. James 5:19 and 20, "If anyone among you wanders from the truth and someone brings him back, let him know that whoever brings back a sinner from his wandering will save a soul from death and will cover a multitude of sins." Galatians 6:1, "Brothers, if anyone is caught in any transgression, you who are spiritual should restore him in a spirit of gentleness." I am not saying that we shouldn't confront a brother about sin. I'm not saying that. I am saying that not everything is everyone's business. Rebuke your brother, warn your brother, strengthen your brother, heal your brother, and then keep your mouth shut about it. That's what you see in Proverbs. The person who doesn't reveal a secret. Look at what Paul says in Ephesians 4. Turn in Ephesians 4. We're going to start reading in verse 25. Ephesians 4, starting in verse 25. "Therefore, having put away falsehood, let each one of you speak the truth with his neighbor, for we are members one of another." Paul says it's not enough to not lie, you have to speak the truth. And he says, "Be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger and give no opportunity to the devil." It's not enough to not sin. You have to resolve your issues. "Let the thief no longer steal, but rather let him labor, doing honest work with his own hands, so that he may have something to share with anyone in need." It's not enough to not steal. You have to work, and work enough to be able to give something away. "Let no corrupting talk come out of your mouths, but only such as is good for building up, as fits the occasion, that it may give grace to those who hear." He says it's not enough to not say true things. It's not enough to only say true things. We have to say true things that build up. The standard is not, it's true so I can tell everyone. The standard is it true and does it build up? Remember, a gossip is a detractor. A gossip is someone who takes away. Paul says we're not people who take away, we're people who contribute and build and strengthen. When I discover Craig's secret sin, it is my duty to go to him and come alongside him and restore him. James 5 and Galatians 6. That is my job. And be someone who has a trustworthy spirit that keeps the secret that I've been entrusted with, Proverbs 11. And to not slander his good name by revealing the secret that I know, Proverbs 20. The reason for this is that our goal is to heal our brother. And again, whispering about a brother's sin behind their back doesn't heal, it hurts. It doesn't unify, it divides. So far, we've defined gossip as speech that's a lie, which slanders our brother. We talk about speech that is unverifiable or it's speculation. We've talked about speech that is true but harmful. We also need to talk about a form of gossip that's the easiest to engage in because it seems the most harmless, I think. Sometimes we engage in gossip by sharing things that are true but just unnecessary. 1 Timothy 5:13, Paul says, besides that, they learn to be idlers. He's talking about young widows here. They learn to be idlers going about from house to house, and not only idlers, but also gossips and busybodies, saying what they should not. Sometimes people just say things they shouldn't say. There's a nuance you see in 1 Timothy that you don't see in passages like Romans 1, where Paul talks about evil and murder. In 1 Timothy, the instigation for the gossip and the result of it seems to be like something out of boredom rather than malice. In 1 Timothy, Paul warns us against being idle. That term translated busybody means busy about trifles and neglectful of important matters, especially other people's affairs. You see an interesting solution in verse 14 of 1 Timothy. So I would have younger widows marry, bear children, manage their households, and give the adversary no occasion for slander. What does he tell them to do? He tells them, go get a family, fill your house up with kids, and you'll have your hands so full you won't have time for gossip anymore. Paul tells them what's been immortalized in song, if you mind your own business, you'll be busy all the time. My favorite, if you mind your own biscuits, life will be gravy. A lesson that we can take away from 1 Timothy, big picture, 30,000-foot view of 1 Timothy, is that not everything is everybody's business. Even if it's true, and even if it doesn't harm them, if it doesn't build them up, maybe the answer is that we should just keep things to ourselves sometimes. So some guardrails to protect us from the sin of gossip. Number one, is what I'm about to say true? If it's not true, it's off the table. We can't say it. Is what I'm about to say speculation? And especially harmful speculation? If it is, we are representatives of the truth. We should not say it. Is what I'm about to say true? If it is, will it harm the reputation of my brother? Because if it harms the reputation of my brother, it detracts. We are people who build up and strengthen. If I am pulling away and detracting, I'm wrong. If what I'm about to say is true, does it do anybody any good to hear it? I would ask this in relation to the 1 Timothy passage about busybodies. Does what I'm about to say build up my brother, or does it fill up my time? As a good guardrail and rule of thumb. Brothers and sisters, your God is strong and mighty. If I know Craig is struggling and in need of prayer, I should go to the King of Kings and name Craig and his struggle and seek his grace and healing for Craig. That should be the first thing I do. Sometimes I've been asked before, what can I do for you? And we say things, have you ever heard something like, well, all you can do is pray. Well, just pray. As if like, well, you can't solve my problem, so I guess you could just pray about it. That's the first line of defense. What can you do? The first thing I want you to do is go to the creator of the universe and tell him about my problem. Our God is strong and mighty. And that prayer is enough. There is no limit to what your prayers are able to accomplish. There is no scoreboard in heaven where problems with the most prayers are solved first. There's no ranking system where my problem accumulates enough points because all of you prayed for me, and so God moves it to the top of the list. Don't ever dare limit your God like that. What does gossip look like in the world? It looks like slander and lies to cut down and tear apart and destroy. What does gossip sometimes look like in the church? Sometimes gossip in the church looks like a prayer request. You see, I'm worried about Craig, and so I go to Pat and Scott. And I share what I know about Craig with them so that they can pray too. Now, I don't really want to share this, Scott. But, Craig sure does need your prayers right now. Brothers and sisters, that's gossip. I am sharing something that detracts from Craig under the veil of a prayer request. I'm seeking help for Craig. That's all I'm doing. I'm just trying to follow the Bible's example and pray to God for help. And so in the course of that, I'm going to be sure that all of you know about Craig's secret problem that I found out about by accident. And I'm going to detract from Craig's character. Your God is so big and so strong and so mighty, there is nothing your God cannot do. If I pray alone, if I'm the only one in the whole world praying for Craig, God has the power to heal him. Are we all in agreement on that? God's also smart enough to know who you're praying for, even if you don't say a name, and smart enough to know the struggles we have without naming them. Do we really believe that if I ask Pat and Scott, instead of, there's option one where I go to Scott and I say, listen, I learned this about Craig, and it's eating me up inside because I've got to let it out. I've got to tell somebody about it. And so I'm going to tell you about it under the veil of a prayer request. That's option number one. Option number two is to go to Pat and to go to Scott and say, I have a friend who's struggling. Please pray for him. I can't give you any details right now, but please pray for my friend. Do we really believe that God would be up in heaven scratching his head? Eric sends up his prayer for Craig, and God's like, got it, Craig. He's got a problem, I'm on it, Eric. And then Scott and Pat pray to God about Eric's friend that has an unknown friend with an unknown problem, and God's scratching his head when he's like, I wonder who in the world they're talking about. What is going on down there? I need some more details. Our God is big and strong and mighty. There's nothing our God cannot do. And if you feel the need, let's all pray. Pray for my friend. And that's all I can tell you right now. God will hear it. Even if you were the only one praying, God can heal. He is a powerful God, and you have powerful prayers. I was struggling with a problem recently. It was a personal stuff. It's work problems that don't interest anybody, but it was on my heart. And I looked around one Wednesday night. I looked around and I said, I need somebody to pray for me. I looked around and I saw Rhett Griffith. And I thought, Rhett Griffith prays. That's what I know about Rhett. And I found one person, and I asked Rhett to pray for me. And it's enough. It's enough. There are no carve-outs for gossip in the New Testament. There's no passage that says if you're really trying to help somebody, it's okay to tell the world about their problems. And we should never use the veil of a prayer request to hide or justify what the Bible calls sin. Let's talk about some examples of how this plays out in our lives as both the speaker and the recipient of gossip. If we find ourselves engaging in speech that's untrue or speculation, harmful to our brother, that doesn't build them up, stop. Just stop. You're wrong. Just stop. You're feeding the flesh and not being led by the Spirit. If you find yourself as the recipient of this information, what then? Luckily, it's a much shorter checklist for the listener. When someone starts to talk to you about a brother or sister, ask yourself, do I think better about my brother based on what I'm hearing? If the answer is no, stop. Here's something that I've seen used to good effect. I have heard people say, stop, I don't need to know that. Just stop listening. And I don't mean stand there and let your eyes glaze over and just kind of tune out. I mean take a stand for the truth and say, stop talking to me. I don't need to know that, and you don't need to say it. If we were standing in the lobby after services and I offered you some crack cocaine, I assume you wouldn't receive it, carry it around for a little while, think about it, mull it over, and then decide to do nothing with it. Remember Nancy Reagan's slogan, just say no? Well, just say no. Gossip only works, it's only given power, it's only able to tear down and divide when people listen. Brothers and sisters, do you remember the hands that went up at the beginning of this class? We have a gossip problem in Christianity today. And it has to stop. Gossip destroys and it divides. When your walk involves gossip, it is not in step with the Spirit. We need to resolve that at least in our church family right here, we won't tolerate it. That we will say stop. Now, we've got a few minutes left. I'd like to talk about some exceptions to all of this. The question comes up, what if my brother is in sin? I'm not able to restore him by myself. Craig has got all these problems. He has all these problems. I'm not able to fix Craig by myself. What if I maybe even know ahead of time that Craig won't listen to me? Like Craig, he just doesn't like me. And I know that if I go to Craig, that he's gonna immediately reject anything that I have to say. So what do we do about that? Well, let's talk for just a minute about Matthew 18. In Matthew 18, starting in verse 15, Jesus gives some guidelines for when brothers have sinned against each other. If your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. If he listens to you, and you have gained your brother, but if he does not listen, take one or two others along with you, that every charge may be established by the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. If he refuses to listen to them, tell it to the church. Matthew 18 deals directly with a specific circumstance where a brother has sinned against you. I think we need to be careful we don't try to shoehorn the commands of Matthew 18 into situations where it doesn't apply. But there are some general truths and wisdom in how Jesus told people to handle interactions and problems. There is nothing in Matthew 18, read it, there is nothing in Matthew 18 that condones gossip. Read Jesus' instructions carefully. His command is to go and tell him his fault. Okay, I did that. I went to Craig. It didn't work. And then take 2 or 3 with you so that every charge may be established and the brother can listen to the witnesses. I bring Scott and Pat with me so that Craig can listen to Scott and Pat and they can listen to him. A correct reading of Matthew 18 involves witnesses hearing the accusation and defense of 2 brothers. Not the accusation alone. In the case of a true Matthew 18 scenario, Craig has sinned against me. He swindled me out of some money in a business deal. So I go to Craig alone and I confront him. Now Craig, he's a dirty, rotten swindler. And so he denies the accusation. We're unable to reconcile with each other. So I go get Pat and Scott. I know that they're both mature, spiritual, wise men. And Craig and I both respect them. So I go and I tell Pat and Scott, I have a disagreement with Craig. I haven't been able to resolve. I'd like you to come with me to talk to him. And that's it. Nothing else. I don't prime them up and tell them, Scott, listen, you know how Craig is kind of swindly, right? Well, you wouldn't believe what happened the other day. I don't prime them ahead of time for what is going to happen. I just go to them and I say, Scott, Pat, please come talk to Craig with me. And then when we're all in the room at the same time, Craig and I talk about what happened. Because that's justice, an impartial witness hearing both sides of an issue at the same time directly from the people involved. That's justice. Now let's talk about how that plays out in matters that don't exactly fit the mold of Matthew 18. I disagree with Craig on some theological matter. I believe that Genesis 1 teaches the world was created in 6 literal 24-hour days, and Craig reads Genesis 1 as being metaphorical, that the earth and life as we know it was created by God through evolution over billions of years. Now, I feel very strongly on my Genesis 1 position. In fact, I believe that Craig's soul is in danger because he's putting his faith in men and science rather than the Word of God. I believe that he's putting his faith in the wrong place. This is a salvific issue to me. And I believe it's dangerous for Craig to have a position of authority or teach classes in our church. Now, he's always kept this opinion about Genesis 1 to himself, but I know how he thinks, and I feel compelled to fix the way that he thinks. I study with Craig. We can't come to an agreement. Now, if I go round up Pat and Scott and I bring them to my house to meet with Craig to sort all this out, trying to follow the wisdom of Matthew 18, I have to bring Pat and Scott in blind, because what happens if I don't? If I go to Pat and say, Craig believes XYZ about Genesis and creation, I'd like you to come with me to straighten him out, and Pat declines. What if Pat says, stop talking, this isn't a Matthew 18 issue, I don't think I should be involved, or actually I agree with Craig on Genesis, or sorry, I'm busy that weekend, try asking Dan instead. Now I've looped Pat into a situation that he has nothing to do with, that he can't help with, and I have brought him into something where he is potentially has a lower opinion of Craig now. I have detracted from Craig. Pat knows something that's none of his business. It's potentially harmful to Craig. And Craig was never able to defend himself. That's the very definition of gossip. If we're going to use Matthew 18 as a pattern of reconciling with our brothers, it should be done with unbiased witnesses who hear both sides of an issue at the same time, directly from the people involved. We've got just a few minutes left. I'm going to talk very big picture about Romans 14 real quick and how this applies to our Genesis disagreement scenario. In Romans 14, Paul deals with how brothers should handle disagreements on spiritual matters. These are not situations where one brother has sinned against another, but they have very sincere, very serious disagreements about a theological issue. The lesson from Romans 14 that applies most readily to our conversation this morning is this: sometimes we won't all agree. And it's okay if people disagree with me. Even on spiritual matters. I may believe that it's a sin for Craig to eat meat. I believe it with all of my heart that if Craig eats meat, it is a sin. And it can still be okay for Craig to eat meat. And while Craig eats meat, it's still okay for me to think it's a sin. The point I'm making is this: just because a brother disagrees with us on a spiritual matter, I don't have the right to weaponize Matthew 18 to spread division within the church. And that has happened in the Lord's church. Sometimes you may go to a brother to resolve a disagreement. You may be unable to reach a resolution, and you might just have to stop. The pattern of Matthew 18 is never offered as a solution in Romans 14. In Romans 14, Paul didn't say, so then you take your other brother and then you gradually drag more and more people into the discussion until everybody agrees on everything. That's not what Paul said. Paul said it's okay if not everybody agrees on everything. The idea that we should go round up more and more people and bring them into a disagreement that I have with Craig over what to eat or what to believe about the observance of days is foreign to Romans 14. I can ask Craig if he's willing to study with more people so that we can agree on the truth. Seeking the truth is never wrong. I can ask him, will you study? Listen, Scott is real smart. Can we bring Scott and let him try to shed some light on this? But dragging brothers into every disagreement over every spiritual issue that comes up is not found in the New Testament. Sometimes I might just have to stop. Seek the truth, seek resolution. It may be your brother's duty to change their ideas and their opinions, their beliefs, their actions. But it may be their duty to do that. But I can guarantee you that it is your duty, my duty, to help restore them without gossip. There's no carve out in the New Testament for gossip. Good will never be accomplished through gossip and division among brothers. Good will never be accomplished that way. I'm going to stop. Danny's standing at the back. He's about to ring the bell. So I know parents want to go grab their kids. I'm going to stop. Thank you for your attention this morning. And class is over.